For in the scriptures, we read about God sending the Son submitting to the Father, and the Son praying, not my will, but yours be done. Reference from Luke 22. It further seemed to dismiss the picture offered by Daniel chapter 7, which Yeshua applied to himself, that he would be sitting on the right hand of God and coming on the clouds of heaven in the eschaton, right? Matthew 26. We referenced that in our eschatology study earlier, where we talked about Yeshua as the Son of Man, seen by Daniel's prophecy in Daniel chapter 7, approaching the Ancient of Days and receiving this kingdom, right? Yeshua has to receive this kingdom in order for God to have his righteous place where he belongs, and in order for Yeshua to receive the inheritance from his Father. Tim continues, such language seems clearly to describe Yeshua as being distinct from the Father, something the idea of modalities could not accommodate. Tim continues, in addition to the important hypostasis used to designate the concept of nature, and particularly the distinct nature of the plurality within the Godhead, the early church fathers chose the Greek word ousia, meaning that which exists and therefore has substance, property, wealth, right? So we've got these two Greek words that are helping us to try and unpack all that Yeshua represents for us by the somewhat challenging language that the Bible lays down for us. Although it's authoritative, it's still nevertheless challenging. Tim continues, by property, when we're talking about ousia, the Greek word, is meant essential qualities, which is also what the word substance means. When we're talking about God's substance, right? We're having an ontological discussion. What is the substance of God? What's he made of, right? What's his composition? What are the sum of his parts? How can we understand that? So Tim talks about substance, which means for this term seeks to describe the essential reality of that being described. Thus, when we encounter the word substance in the Trinitarian debates, right, we're talking about the church fathers and the language that shows up in the all the creeds and things like that. When we encounter this word substance in the Trinitarian debates of the early centuries, we should not think that this implies materialism or physicality when we're talking about God. For the word ousia will be used of the Father and the Spirit as well as of the Son. We're talking about how do we describe the substance of something which is non-corporeal, a spirit, right? God is pure spirit. The Holy Spirit is pure spirit, except for when we're talking about theophanies and the like. The Spirit looking like a dove and things like that. What's the material aspect of something which is otherwise altogether immaterial? That's what we mean by those statements. And Tim concludes by saying, we will see then that the two questions offered above and the subset of questions they generate, right, questions 1 and 2, form the primary focus of controversy in the late 2nd centuries and onwards, controversies that eventually led to the formulation of the Orthodox Christian Trinitarian creeds. Moreover, we will see that the Orthodox formulation sought to substantiate one ousia in 3 hypostases, right? And that's really the conclusion of where this discussion is going, not just from the early centuries perspective, but has carried along down with us down to this day. How can God have this substance that is found in all 3 persons all at the same time? And yet Yeshua is one of those persons who exists with a substance that is equal to mine, right? Yeshua was fully human and I'm fully human. And yet Yeshua is now more than human and I'm not yet, right? Yeshua has been transformed. He now has his resurrected body and I'm still awaiting mine. But when he walked the earth before the resurrection, he was as human as I am. Although he had a nature that was fully divine, that I can't quite fully comprehend how they could be joined together in the hypostatic union there. So that really is the bottom line for us as biblical Unitarians and Trinitarians dealing with the angel of the Lord prophecies, the angel of the Lord encounters. So I'm going to kind of accelerate this and perhaps maybe just draw this to a close tonight. As we begin to look at the angel of the Lord, maybe in other passages, and we certainly should, I'm hoping biblical Unitarianism does it for us. If they don't, just be aware that we started out in Genesis 16 with Hagar and the angel of the Lord. You can see on my screen, if I scroll down into the to the story, starting in verse 7. Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water. But quickly, as we begin to keep going through the biblical narratives, and we'll get to this in time, we surely must, I'm certain that they do, we're going to encounter passages like Genesis 22. Even before that, we get Genesis 18, where God and 2 angels show up and start chatting with Abraham. I don't have this in my on my screen right now, but you're aware of it as a Bible student, where it's not the angel of the Lord language, but it's God in theophany form talking with Abraham, and yet it looks like 3 men to Abraham, but one of the figures is definitely God. It's Yahweh, right? So, but as we look at angel of the Lord language, right, that specific phrase in the Hebrew Malach Adonai, then we can jump all the way to Genesis 22. Came about after these things that God tested Abraham, and Abraham said, "Here am I. Take your son, your only son, whom you love." And then the language quickly switches over to the angel of the Lord that Abraham dialogues with on the mountain there. And the angel even says, "Now I know that you," in verse 11, the angel of the Lord said, "Abraham, Abraham," and he says, "Here I am." Even Abraham's response is identical to God, to the angel, "Here I am," right? "Don't stretch out your hand against the lad, do nothing, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from him." No, that's not what the text says. It says, "Not withheld your only son from me," but it's the angel of the Lord. And this particular example that we're going to get to in time is quite unique, because in one breath, in one sentence, in one statement, this figure of the angel of the Lord speaks in first person as God and third person referring to God in one statement, right? He says, "Don't stretch out your hand against the lad and do nothing to him, for now I know that you fear God," third person, "since you haven't withheld your only son from me," first person, right? In one breath. I mean, this has got to really throw a monkey wrench in the argument and logic of the biblical Unitarians, who say that, no, the angel of the Lord is only an angel. He speaks as God and for God because he's an agent, right? Well, wait a minute. What about this one? This one, I know they're going to explain it in their own weird way when we get to it, but I'm just going to kind of give you advance notice. But in the end, really, context determines. There are some passages that are clearly describing the angel of the Lord in a role that is a manifestation of God himself. And it's unmistakable from his words and his actions that we're dealing with a theophany, or language very closely describing what would be classified as a theophany. Even though it uses the word angel there, it's just, remember, the word angel is more of a functional word. It's more of a tool to describe messenger. It describes function. It doesn't really describe identity per se. The word messenger, the word angel, malach in the Hebrew, I'll flash a little graphic on the screen and post for you to see this. The Hebrew word for angel, malach, when we get the English word angel, or the Greek word angelos, is related to the English word messenger, which is also related to the Greek word apostolos, from which we get the English word apostle. And so all of these words, angel, messenger, apostle, they all are functional words. They're not really describing necessarily the identity of a person so much as they're simply describing the title. They're describing the function that a person is playing at any given time in a narrative. So it's a tool. So don't get confused when God's theophany as a messenger is described as an angel, where God himself is described as an angel, right? Doesn't mean that God is an angel. It's just the word angel there is translated as messenger. It doesn't mean angel as in the angelic being. It just means a messenger in that regard. But there are other cases, and I'm trying not to confuse you, but I have to at least explain this part. There are other cases in the Bible, and we looked at these last week. Go back and listen to episode number 207 of my live internet studies. Watch the YouTube video. There are other cases where the Bible is clearly describing an angel, and it uses the same Hebrew word malach, or the Greek word angelos, depending on if you're reading the Septuagint, and it's meant to inform us that it is a created creature, a messenger, someone sent by God. It is not God in manifest form as in theophany. So all of these passages, whether it's the ones in Genesis or Exodus or ones we read later on in the other prophets, we jump through some of the Hebrew, and I'm kind of quickly just rushing through some of this because I feel like I'm kind of belaboring the point, and I think most of you are getting this. Joshua 5, when we get down to the end of the chapter, a man stands in front of Joshua, starting in verse 13, and it's not the angel of the Lord name. Instead, it's a figure known as the captain of the army of the Lord. But it's the same concept going on. It's a divine type figure, a very heavenly looking figure that is meant to give us this understanding of God is all powerful and divine, and yet manifests himself in a way in which we can interact with him on using one of our five senses. Right? We see or we hear or we dialogue with. And in many cases, it short circuits our senses, right? I'm reminded of poor Daniel or even John on the Isle of Patmos. When they have encounters with angelic beings, they're left shaking and sick for many days, like Daniel was, right? Sick to his very being. Or Ezekiel, they faint, they pass out. They're undone, right? Their knees become weak, and the bones give way, and they just drop, right? They're like, for that very moment, they're just boneless, right? They can't stand. And so interacting with these beings, or God himself in theophany form, short circuits us as humans. Not all the time, but many times. And so as we begin to look at these passages, whether it's the angel of the Lord or the captain of the Lord's armies, these are all meant to give us a picture. Notice in Malachi, behold, I'm sending my messenger. But if I click on the little A there, it tells me that this is actually angel. But every translation I've looked at usually says, behold, I'm sending my messenger, and he will clear a way before me. But it's actually the word angel. And I wanted to bring that up for you because it's just, the translators choose to decide whether it says messenger or angel there. It's talking about function. But in this case, it's proper to understand that this is referring to Yeshua. But because the context demands that was going on. And the reason I brought Malachi in is because in closing, this is the book that's the final book of the Old Testament from the Christian ordering of the books of the Old Testament. And it's fitting that this chapter, which is near the end of the book of Malachi, the letter to Malachi, begins describing this messenger that's going to come to Israel and come suddenly to his temple, the one that the Lord is sending and the one whom the people are seeking. And he's described as the Lord whom you are seeking, the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight. Behold, he is coming. But notice the prophecy says, behold, I'm sending my messenger, right? And he will clear a way before me. So God is speaking in the first person, and speaking of this messenger as in third person. And the Lord whom you are seeking will suddenly come to his temple. What? Notice the language, how it smoothly transitions between first person and third person, between God and his messenger. And the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, behold, he is coming, says the Lord of armies. Reminds me of the Zechariah passage when it says, you will look on him whom you pierced, and you will mourn from him as one mourns for an only son. They will look on me whom they pierced, and mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. This is reminiscent of the Genesis 22 passage where the angel of the Lord speaks in just seamlessly of first person I as God and he as God at the same time, right? Me and I. And yet he. So the Bible, what is it doing? It's prepping us, at least this last book of the Bible from the Christian rendering. I know in the Jewish reckoning, it's 2nd Chronicles. But either way, we're talking about prepping us for the time period of the coming of Messiah and the incarnation, the intertestamental period between the Old and New Testament of your Bible, that time period when Trinity was revealed fully to us as human beings. And so that's why in my notes here, I've got this transition, as it were, from the prophecies and the angel of the Lord into the Malachi passages, and then suddenly moving into Mark. Behold, I'm sending my messenger before you who will prepare your way. The voice of one calling out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Notice Mark records that we prepared the way for the messenger. Behold, I'm sending my messenger. That's God's voice. I'm sending my messenger before you. But then verse 3 says, the voice of one calling out the windows, prepare the way of the Lord. Make his path straight. Is it the Lord who we're preparing the way for? Wait a minute. I thought the Lord's saying, I'm sending my messenger. So here we have a verse in Mark chapter 1, where God is speaking in first person saying, behold, I'm sending my messenger. We just looked at that in Malachi. Behold, I'm sending my messenger. But then it's Isaiah's voice that says, the voice of one calling out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight. Mark, by smashing these two, by making a conflation of these two verses that are passages found in Malachi and in Isaiah. And in fact, he gives Isaiah the credit when he says, just as Isaiah said, which is kind of an odd thing. But Mark is doing for us, he's showing us how the messenger of the Lord is also the Lord, right? Behold, I'm sending my messenger before you. That's God talking. That's the Lord talking. But in verse 3, prepare the way of the Lord. Make his path straight. It's the Lord who we're preparing the way for. So this is the culmination of our angel of the Lord passages, where we find the angel of the Lord is the Lord, and yet the angel of the Lord is a messenger of the Lord. Understand? So it is both and. There's the tension created by the fact that some passages refer to the angel as the Lord himself, and other passages refer to the angel as a messenger of the Lord, a separate person from the Lord, right? And from there, this is where I was going to go if I draw this out another week or two. We find Luke having similar language. Let me see. Why did I bring Luke up? The messenger from God. The messenger from John. This is Yeshua's recounting that the one that talked about the one who's preparing the way is John, who comes in the spirit of Elijah. In fact, when we get down to Luke chapter 7, verse 27, Yeshua asks him, "Who did you go out into the desert to see?" Then Yeshua quotes the passage that we just read earlier. "Behold, I'm sending my messenger ahead of you, who prepare your way before you." Right? This quotation from the Isaiah passage is reminiscent of the Malachi passage because it talks about the messenger who's going to prepare your way. And then Yeshua gives us the interpretation. In verse 28, "I say to you, among those born of women, there's no one greater than John, yet the one who is least in the kingdom of God is greater than he." It's John that is the person who's the one that God would send, yet it's Isaiah who prophesies that this one who would come. And this is the spirit of Elijah that we're talking about as well. So Isaiah prophesying about the spirit of Elijah, of which John then is that one that Yeshua says partially fulfills this particular prophecy. So we were going to go with that in that direction, but we're going to culminate in the New Testament passages where it talks about how that Christ is the one in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Christ is the one who is, let me scroll down, in verse 9, it's a familiar passage for us Trinitarians. "In him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form, and in him you've been made complete, and he is the head over every rule and authority. In him you were circumcised with the circumcision performed without hands." What's the point? Is the point by Paul here is that Messiah is the one who is the fullness, right? Let me go back to those verses there. Verse 9. "In him, all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form." So when we're talking about the angel, is it God or is it a messenger? The answer is yes. The angel of the Lord embodies the fullness of all that God is in those moments when he is appearing before us. But in some cases, the Old Testament is simply trying to show us that it's God. And in other instances, it was clearly just an angel. Likewise, Yeshua, and I'm saying this in closing, Yeshua is truly God and fully God because in him the fullness of deity dwells. What part is lacking there? For those of you who say that Yeshua is less than God, you've either obviously not read this verse or you're ignoring it or you've rejected it because your theology forces you to reject it. But I'm here to tell you that it's authoritative. The Bible tells us that Yeshua has the fullness of deity dwelling in him. That means nothing's lacking in Yeshua when it comes to the nature, right? Those two words again, hypostasis and ousia. The ousia of God dwells fully in Yeshua. The fullness of deity dwells in bodily form. This is the hypostatic union. This is the incarnation all over again. If we would just get it through our heads that Yeshua is fully God in incarnate form, that means he's truly God and truly man, we would solve the tension of all these angel of the Lord passages and the arguments between biblical Unitarianism and biblical Trinitarianism would all melt away, because we'd understand that we're dealing with a person who is fully God but is fully man. Even though it creates tension, it nevertheless is the only way to truly harmonize all of the scriptures that are brought up in discussions when we're having this dialogue between is God Trinity or is he not? But I think what I'll do is I'll leave off right there. We'll stop right there. I was going to bring in a resource on angelology from the Talmudic, from a biblical Talmudic and post-Talmudic Jewish encyclopedia resource where they talk about angelology. And if I scroll down a little bit, maybe I will read just a little bit of this. Under the title of Nomenclature and Essence, this is a resource from a non-Christian perspective. They have this little discussion where they talk about the angel of the Lord, and they begin to talk about how that this angel of the Lord figure, let me see if I can find all the references. The angel of the Lord is a special messenger who appeared to Moses in the flame, and they're not going to say that this is a pre-incarnate Yeshua, obviously. But what they are going to say is that at times the angel clearly distinguishes himself from the Lord who sends him, and though appearing in human form, he has no individuality. And so they show you references, and they talk about that being only a temporary manifestation of God, he can never replace his presence. Wherefore Moses, not satisfied with the Lord, saying, I will send an angel before thee, replies, if thy presence will not go not with me, carry us not up hence. And so the big point that I was going to bring out there is that they talk about that, how that the angel of the Lord is God appearing in human form. He has no individuality in and of himself. So they're leaning more on the side of that the angel Lord is representing an interaction with God on a tangible level, so that we humans can interact with God. But at times the angel clearly distinguishes himself from the Lord. So they're recognizing, they're saying the same thing that all three of us, we biblical Unitarians, we biblical Trinitarians, and then Rabbinic Judaism, we're all recognizing that the angel of the Lord is sometimes very God manifest in a theophany way, and at other times it's the angel separate from God, the angelic being, and yet uses the phrase angel of the Lord in both of those cases. We just have to let context decide. But we'll draw this part of our study to a close. I think most of you get the idea. That'll do it for a Trinitarian response to biblical Unitarianism.